Welcome to the second part of my conversation with Shane Bunnag. In this section, we discuss the relationship between the past and the present and the influence of the COVID pandemic on the process of writing. If you're enjoying our conversation, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Welcome back to the second part of my conversation with Shane Bunnag about Chariot of the Sun. If you didn't catch the first part, I do suggest you check that out first. We were talking at the end of the last section about a particular period in the 60s and 70s, and you mentioned the sort of progression of the book through various periods of Thai history. But in terms of structure, it actually moves back and forth between the relatively recent past, and in particular people and events still in living memory, and then back into parts of the more distant past. In particular, it felt, particularly in the first half of the book, that the fall of the old capital at Utia in the 1700s featured very heavily. So could you say a bit about why you opted for that structure rather than a kind of linear progression? And almost also maybe about the sort of centers of gravity, if you like, of the narrative as you put it together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I probably try and dress it up a little bit, but you know, there's a part of it in writing the book where I'm trying to figure out how I fit in with all of this stuff, and it's partly, you know, I'm half Thai, and I was born in England. I grew up in Greece, and you know, and I got to know Thailand as an adult. And before that, I knew Thailand through my grandparents. So my Thai's not great. I mean, I can read and write a little bit, but I've never really been accepted as Thai. And I don't know whether I'm really accepted as a Bunnag, whatever that's supposed to mean. So I was trying to understand myself. And I don't like this like searching for roots thing, because I think, you know, nobody's, you know, everyone's roots are pretty, like, they just go back a generation or something like that. But there wasn't so much roots, but it's like, how does this really relate to me? And what am I passing on? And what is really our legacy somehow with this? So that was one of the ideas of, you know, cutting between the present and the past. And then it's also, you know, in terms of its weighting, you've got these grand figures who are like leading armies and, you know, engineering palace coups and doing all this kind of, you know, building temples, whatever. And then there's me, and I'm like trying to write, you know, this book on making obscure films, and no one's interested in whatever. And it's more interesting to kind of cut between those, because I'm part of that story. And if we're talking about the Bunnag family, we're actually talking about people who were born with that surname, and people who were born with that surname, it only goes back to my grandfather. It's a really recent thing. So there's a lot of invention of past there, and there's always going to be a lot of history, of mythology in the history, you know, of saying like, well, we are the ones who hold on to that, and it belongs to us, which is fine, because I think in a way in a family although, you know, history belongs to everybody, and who knows where the bloodlines really are, but the people who have that lineage are the ones who are the guardians of it, because they're closer to it. That's the theory of it. And if that's the case, then I should also be part of the guardianship of it. And what can I do in my shepherding, husbandry, guardianship, whatever you call it? Well, I can give it a sort of more international touch, and I can do it through the English language experience, through English literature. And I can't pretend to do that as a Thai. So I can cut between those elements. And then there's this innocent idea, you know, of anecdote and history. But then, as I keep saying, there's something bodily, and it comes through, you know, myself and my experience of like I don't know, if the Thai heat or the scent or something like that, that is somehow part of, you know, the destiny of this Persian guy who got off the boat or however came over land in 1600. And that's curious. Structure is important, because without structure, you don't really have a story. You just have a catalogue. And, you know, you'll see that like you know, the Odyssey, for example, it starts in the third act. You know, there's and then it doubles back and you hear how he got to Calypso's island, and then, why he's with the Phaeacians, and then he goes on, for example. Or you have other things that I took as an inspiration, like Richard Kapuscinski's Shah of Shahs. I don't know if you know, but he was a Polish journalist who covered, sort of wars and revolutions in the Third World throughout the Cold War. He was an amazing writer who's kind of out of fashion now because he did some naughty things. But the Shah of Shahs is about the fall of the last Shah of Persia, and he organized a book like sort of mosaic, like a Persian carpet. So you have all these different elements that are falling into place, and and as they come, the combined weight of them is leading towards the collapse of this regime. So that was on my mind. And another writer I really admire is Georges Perec, French writer, who wrote this book called W, or in French W, which is a sort of play on words meaning double life. So what he did is he cuts between childhood memory of the war, during which his father was killed fighting the Germans, and his mother was, died in the Holocaust. So he has this side very personal, and then the other side is a fictional tale about a community on an island in sort of Patagonia, where they're forced to play these barbaric games, and you realize that he's sort of talking about the experience of the Holocaust through this other means, because it's impossible to actually approach that. So I had these ideas about structure and how I could build up something that would be compelling and put together, 15 generations or whatever, without having to go chronologically up to the present era and then wave at the end of it. I think it needed to cut back and forth. And then in the writing of it, in the conception of it, it was a meandering process, as I've said many times as well. Like certain elements got added onto it until eventually I had a work which is a little bit of a world in itself.
And you, in that last answer, you sort of contrasted your own current projects with these sort of nation shaping ancestors who held high positions in government. But yeah, there's one actually quite disturbing detail towards the end of the book where you refer to a death threat made to your father during the political upheavals of 2010, which obviously indicates that at least some people don't see that past as being particularly distant. They see it as relevant. Fortunately, nothing ever came of that threat, as far as I understand. So, it seems that whoever made that threat saw him, and by extension your family, as part of the old order. What were your thoughts on what that incident sort of reveals about how people relate to the past? Perhaps in general, and perhaps in Thailand specifically, thinking about the current political context here.
Yeah, I think there's one thing is the family and what it might have meant historically once upon a time. And then there's my dad. And, frankly, he teaches Tai Chi and meditation. He's kind of like an old hippie, and he lives in Spain, not even in Thailand. And he works, when he's in Thailand, he's involved in a charity in the Klong Toh slums. He's like really lefty, he's not an elitist. So that he received a death threat, sort of, we're going to string you up from the lamppost kind of thing. That's kind of laughable. It's horrible, but it's ridiculous. And so who was this, person who did and why? And there's obviously ignorance involved, but perhaps it was trying to create maybe it was a kind of counter-revolutionary attempt to provocation. I don't know. The past is a hugely emotive thing, and I was thinking about this recently because I was sent a review of my uncle Tej's book, which is called Thai Diplomacy, which you can download online, and it's really good. It really sets out Thailand's position in the world and its policy, and he's one of the policy makers. But the author of the review, it's called Craig Reynolds. He's an Australian, I think he's Australian anyway. He's a sort of big figure in Thai history. He made the point that there's a difference between the state and the nation, and the state is a sort of it's a structure, and it's there shouldn't be emotion involved in the state, and it functions in order to look after the people within the nation. But the nation is more of a emotional construct in which people can get, they usually get fired up by some historical thing, like this tradition belongs to us and not our neighbors, whatever it is. And my uncle's in the review is more of a kind of state person. Like he's a historian. He looks at things in a sort of measured academic manner, and will try to guide people according to that, and not to look at emotion. That's sort of what history was meant to be ideally, is that you can read any history. You don't have to invest yourself in the past. You can see the source material presented clearly, and you can make, you can form a good opinion about how this affects the present and the future according to that. However, history is, often, and I probably fall a little bit prey to this myself in the book, so I should watch out, but it's often, mythological, and it's about nation building, and it's about, bringing up, sort of the ghosts of the past. So, clearly people are going to latch onto things, and one of them could be, blaming kind of a non-existent elite, like the Bunnags, who, they're very soft target, because it's not a powerful family, particularly anymore. And I'm not even sure if it's really a family. I mean, there's like over 30,000 Bunnags, and most of them don't talk to each other. So I'm curious. On this thing of, the ghost of the past, it was quite interesting the way that there was during the 19th century, King Rama V made a speech, I think, in the Ayutthaya about how Thailand ought to be aware of its national past. And in that they was forming a sense of destiny around race, and around, the kind of the mission that Thailand had been given through its ancestors. And that's very 19th century, and was very appropriate of that time. And out of that you have, so the histories of Prince Damrong, who is often editing the past and trying to clear them up, or trying to give an idea of national identity. And, I can see that within the global context that was appropriate, but, throughout the 20th century, we were very much haunted by those kind of ghosts, by this trajectory, like race, the nation, and those kind of things. And I think this threat to my father as a member of this family is part of that, a vestige of that.
Yeah. And can we touch also on we mentioned it already, the context in which you wrote it, which was, during the COVID period. So from what I understand, you undertook a lot of the research and writing, and actually this links to a lot of what you said about the bodily aspect of memory. You're actually walking around the city and were physically present there, often in the, in passages you sort of mention how deserted areas are, because it was during pandemic. And there are times when you represent this as a kind of pause. At one point you write, we are mid-leap, but towards what? So, looking back now we're early 2025, where do you think we've leapt to globally, and also in Thailand, since, from pre and post-pandemic?
Well, for me, the pandemic was really like the unimaginable happening. Like it's sort of all bets are off. Like this thing can occur, and since then, the unimaginable keeps happening. So, in a way, I think that's where we are. But I don't know. I mean, I quite enjoyed during COVID. I came across this. There's a French writer called Michel Houellebecq. He's kind of a pessimist. And someone asked him, what do you think is going to happen with COVID? What will the world be like afterwards? And he said, oh, don't worry, it'll all be the same, only worse. And then there's a little bit of that. And there's a little bit within that of, yes, we're getting older. So we always think that yesterday was better because it was, more fun to be young and, and to see, to have this sort of excitement about the world. So I have to be a little bit aware of that as a middle-aged man, that, I shouldn't harp on too much about the past. Maybe it's because the future's not mine, it's for younger people, and they'll find their city and they'll find their way. The phrase, mid-leap, but toward what? I think it was, I was standing on the street looking across at Convent Road. I was on Ceylon Road looking at Convent Road, and on one corner had been a family house where my great grandfather lived. On the other corner, there, for many years, most of what I remember, it had been a parking lot with a coffee shop underneath. And during COVID, they did a massive construction there, and it was billboards up, and whatever was happening. I was thinking about how that place that we used to go to in the 90s, and where we'd park and we'd go out to Soy 4 or whatever, or that place that in the early 2000s they used to have coffee, that once that was gone, those memories, some of this silly, daily memory things would not have a space to attach themselves anymore. And so sort of, and thinking about that in terms of the whole city, that there's so many places because it changes so rapidly, that those memories that in another city, which is more kind of stable somehow, like say London or Paris, you kind of reattach to the neighborhood or to the building. But Bangkok, things are in flux. Having said that, I was recently in Bangkok, and I went to the building, which is open, and they did a beautiful job. Like where the parking lot was, there's now a nice open forecourt with a plaque saying that there was once a historic house here, and there were people sitting there in the shade of trees and having nice coffee, and the building's beautifully designed, and I have nothing to complain about with that. I just have to accept that it's not so much my city anymore, or the city that I got attached to, though I had kind of the more intense experiences was during the 90s and early 2000s, and maybe up to 2010, and that will pass. However, it's my job to record what it was, and it's important, even in its mundane details, it's important, and to put that in the context of the more dramatic things that have happened there, because we've always lived in this space for hundreds of years, and within a family, hundreds of years in the same places, and there's some kind of resonance. I think that's interesting. It doesn't have to be a reactionary thing. It doesn't have to be a classist thing. It can be something we all share in. Just an acknowledgement of that.
Do you think, you just mentioned that had done a nice job in that particular spot and actually acknowledged the past, referred to the old house. That's not always the case. And there's another bit where you're on the other side of the river, kind of just looking at the side of a shopping mall. There's just this kind of wall there and nothing there. Yeah, do you think this actually does damage? I know that word can be used sort of very abstractly and metaphorically when we're talking about things like memory, but do you think it is damaging when the past is erased without acknowledgement, when the city changes so much and there aren't the traces left? Or do we get too dramatic about this and actually things move on and it's fine?
I know. Come on. I think it's tragic. I think it's a total tragedy that there aren't sort of beautiful neighborhoods left with old villas and things like that. Of course, it's not that realistic because of the sheer volume. The population's such that you need housing. So if the whole center of town was taken up with sort of sprawling gardens and villas and things like that, then it would be very unfair at the same time. But I don't think it had to be quite as I don't think the destruction had to be quite as rapacious as it had been in Thailand. It's just that it had gone in that direction, and then there's no use in getting upset about it. So you have to find another way to deal with it, because you're just going to upset yourself unnecessarily, bang your head against the wall, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I think that brings us back to the value of writing. I think the text itself and the images you've included, a sort of testament to that history. So there's an act of preservation going on there as well.
Yeah, I think the true value of any nation, of any place, are the people. And of course there can be beautiful places, but if they're empty of people and they're empty of relationships and they're empty of discourse, then there's nothing there anymore. And I see that more. Like I've stepped away from Thailand, for various reasons. And when I go back, I fill up my time with seeing those people, some of whom before they pass, and others who are younger, and that gives me the joy. And that is also one of the reasons to write, is to share that with other people. And, you know, in many cases, it's with strangers who then contact me and I have some kind of relationship with them. This is our human destiny. It's just, if we're doing that in the digital space and it belongs to some tech company, maybe that's problematic. So, you know, maybe the book form will persist a little bit around that.
Yeah, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Yeah.
So on that reflective, slightly melancholy note, let's finish there. Thank you so much for the conversation, for your really fascinating answers and insights. Please join us for part 3, where we'll hear Shane's recommendations for related texts. I've no idea what you've got up your sleeves.